Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Rabinowitz, along with Joey Kaufman, after Ohio State's 52-21 win over Wisconsin in the Big Ten opener for both teams. And quite an impressive performance by Ohio State. They scored touchdowns on their first 4 drives, kind of reminiscent of last week when they scored touchdowns in the first 7 drives against Toledo. People expected, expected Wisconsin to put up a tougher test. They didn't.
Well, Wisconsin won the coin toss, and they deferred to the second half.
Bad move.
So Ohio State got the ball, and that was my thought when it happened in real time. I said, "Are you sure about that, Paul Chryst? Are you sure you want to give the ball to the Ohio State offense to start the game?" And the Buckeyes went down. And it went pretty much with ease. 6 plays. It was like 92 yards, or
No, it wasn't
88 yards.
Yeah.
But it was basically the length of the field because Chip Trayanum bobbled the
right.
opening kickoff and spotted the ball at the 12-yard line, had to recover it, so they had to go even longer, and it didn't matter. Ohio State went down and scored fast.
Yeah. You must have been watching the Maryland kickoff return to start that game against Michigan, but he did recover, unlike Maryland. Yeah, I thought C.J. Stroud at the beginning of the game was as sharp as he's ever been. I think he was 8 for his first 8, and some of those were tough passes, tight windows, and he got a lot of help. Obviously, the running game was really good. Both Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams went over 100 yards. Cade Stover is proving that he is a real force as a weapon at tight end. Of course, you have Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, Julian Fleming had a really good game. They didn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba. It didn't matter.
They didn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba. They didn't also, on the defensive side of the ball, have Cam Brown, who was listed as unavailable on the status report about 2.5 hours before kickoff. And then Denzel Burke, the other cornerback, was also out. He went through the first round of warm-ups with a club on his right hand. It basically looked like a boxing glove, more or less. And then when they went in the locker room, and usually it's the first round of warm-ups, they come out for a second round. Usually the players are in full uniform, helmet, pads, the whole 9 yards there. And he was in a hooded sweatshirt. He was not playing. So that was a big loss because you have those 2 guys out. You have Jordan Hancock, who's out. You only have 3 scholarship cornerbacks left. And you are turning to J.K. Johnson, a redshirt freshman, and Jair Brown, a freshman. And they held up the back end of the defense.
Yeah, well, it helps that you're playing Wisconsin because Wisconsin is Wisconsin. They're going to run the ball. They're going to just that's what they do. You would think that they would have said, oh, you know what, maybe we ought to try to exploit these 2 young cornerbacks who have very little experience, but that's just not what they do. And so I can't remember them really going after them at all in any kind of specific way.
Yeah.
And Ohio State did a really good job for the most part on Braylon Allen. He had a 75-yard touchdown run at the end. He gets backed up and really skewed his numbers. I think he finished with 165. But when the game was in the balance, which of course wasn't very long, Ohio State really did a good job of holding him in check.
Yeah, it was a game. I think we talked about this all week really in the lead up, that this was going to be a measuring stick of Ohio State's toughness, their ability to hold up in the front of their defense, and they really, I think, did a good job against Braylon Allen. But I think leaving the horseshoe tonight, the thing I'll think about the most is just how good that offense was against a defense that's coached by Jim Leonard, the Wisconsin defensive coordinator. Since he's been in Madison, he's had one of the better defenses in the Big Ten, and they've never given up more than 50 points. The most he's only twice allowed more than 40 points. The 52 points Ohio State put up tonight, most they've ever allowed since Leonard's been calling the defense there. And I think we expected maybe going into this, at least I did, that Ohio State was going to have to grind out some drives. And for a lot of the first half, they were just going down the field in rapid fashion. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it felt like almost the 2014 Big Ten title game where they just storm out of the gates and just put up points. I'm sure Wisconsin fans were having some not so fond memories of that one.
I'm glad you read my early game story. Thank you. I did reference that. It didn't quite finish that way. It wasn't 59-0, but look, it was 31-7 at half. It was 38-7 after the first possession of the second half by Ohio State. This game was really never in doubt. I always thought that this was a tough matchup for Wisconsin. They just don't have the athletes to deal with Ohio State's athletes, especially on the perimeter. And I mean, they're just not as fast. And this is a game of speed. And you know, Wisconsin's good if you get them, if they're playing a certain type of game. If it's, you know, they're a great bad weather team, you know, but Graham Mertz is just not the kind of guy who's going to light you up. And that's what they needed. You can't, with Ohio State's offense, unless something really strange happens, you're going to have to outscore them. You can't just get 21 points, 24 points and beat them. And Wisconsin's just not equipped to do that.
Especially when Ohio State goes out and scores. I think that's what makes it hard for a team like Wisconsin to keep with Ohio State. Is if Ohio State goes up early, which they did 7-0, and then Graham Mertz throws that interception
Right.
to Tanner McAllister, which was more or less gift wrapped. It looked like there was some miscommunication between Mertz and the wide receiver, and it went right in Tanner McAllister's hands. He returns it to the Wisconsin 16-yard line. To have that happen, where Ohio State goes up big, scores in its opening drive, and then Wisconsin later on gives it right back to Ohio State. You're making it very difficult on yourself to go on the road to try to win at a place you haven't won at in 18 years.
Well, but the truth is, when Ohio State's offense is clicking, I'm not sure it really makes a whole lot of difference who the defense is, because C.J. Stroud can fit the ball into such tight windows. You have such good receivers. You have a strong running game, and the offensive line was just blowing Wisconsin off the ball. And so, yeah, obviously the defense makes a difference. But when Ohio State's clicking, I can't see any defense in the Big Ten really challenging them. I mean, they'll have some tests. I mean, Iowa, whatever their offense is, their defense is very good. Penn State should be a challenge there, and of course Michigan. Other than that, I mean, I just look at this Big Ten schedule and go, who's going to possibly even threaten these guys? They have Rutgers next week. You have Michigan State. Michigan State got blown out today. And, as long as Ohio State does what it can do, there are very few teams in the Big Ten that are going to challenge them.
You mentioned C.J. Stroud. I think the other two guys that were pretty instrumental in the offense, and you did touch on the offensive line, were Trayvon Henderson and Mayan Williams. Both of those guys going over 100 yards. And you saw a little bit of the run game early on against Notre Dame. Mayan Williams was big in that game-winning drive, but this felt the first time all year where they just could overpower a team up front.
Yeah, it was against a good defense. It was the most consistently dominating line it's been. I mean, there were holes that you or I could have run through, for 4 yards, maybe 5 for you and 3 for me. But I'm a little older.
That's pretty good if I get 5.
Well, then the linebacker would have knocked you down, and you would have limped off and never been heard from again.
Yeah, I'd be on a stretcher.
But speaking of, Cade Stover took a hit today, and I asked him about it. He got flipped. I mean, that was not a pretty looking play. And he said basically I was fine after a minute. I got to clear the cobwebs, and then I was fine. But that was all in all, though, it was about as dominating a performance as you could hope for by Ohio State.
The interesting thing will be when the coaches poll and the AP poll come out on Sunday afternoon. This video may already be up and the poll may already be out, but I think Ohio State will get some first place votes, and I think there's a chance they move up at least from number 3, maybe number 2. I think a lot of people will give them first place consideration because you look at the way Georgia didn't really pummel Kent State the way many people thought they would today. And so I think Ohio State is making a case that they could be the number 1 team in the country. And it's not nothing. Obviously, the AP poll doesn't determine anything. The coaches poll doesn't determine anything. But you want to be in a position where you can try to get that number 1 seed in the playoff rankings, and
that's important.
And all that. So it's sort of like I guess in racing they have pole positions. So you want to be in a good one going into the poll rankings, and then the selection committee rankings, and then the playoff if you keep taking care of business.
Well, again, this was what Ohio State wanted it to be. They proved their toughness against a tough team, blowing them out, and now they can. They're not going to coast. That's their mentality. They're not going to coast. If you ever use that word, they probably, would not take kindly to it. But let's face facts. Rutgers is Rutgers, and Michigan State is not what we thought they might be based on what they did against Minnesota. So enjoy this win, Buckeye fans, and thanks for watching.